Hey y'all, I made a fairy house and I want to show you how I made it. I am using a 2-part epoxy dough by Smooth On called Freeform Sculpt. I like it because it cures by chemical reaction instead of by baking. It's good and sticky, so it is perfect for joining a variety of materials together. I also like to use epoxy clay by Aviz Studio. It is a similar product that's available in different colors. I am mixing up a portion to join the cap and stem of this mushroom. I got this, I think, at Joann's Fabrics years ago and put it out in the garden. I think I got it on clearance too, so I was like extra tickled. But the chickens, they just kicked it right out of the bed. It never stood a chance. A little bit of water on my fingertips helps keep my gloves from sticking to the dough and makes it much easier to smooth. I am struggling here, but if there is a crafter, there is a way. The weight and proportions of the mushroom make this tricky to balance, but I'm doing my best. Smushing enough of the dough up onto the stem that it starts to hold is a start. I'm considering adding details, but any nudge causes the stem to droop. So I gave it a twist for texture, and see how well the dough stuck? I'm very pleased. Time to let it cure overnight. I've used the tubs of dough with silicone trivets folded in half to give a lift from below and keep it balanced. It worked out all right. With a rough concept sketch and a cleared work surface, I start by conditioning my glob of scrap brown clay. This is the sourdough starter of my fairy doors. I'm always adding a bit of this or that color, but it's all Primo Sculpey polymer clay. I stack slices of wood to get a feel for how the base will be. There are a few 1/4-inch holes already drilled into this as a botched previous project, but they're perfect for planting the landscape of this fairy house. A blob of wood glue binds the slices, and I use something heavy as a lazy clamp. I have rolled out a slab of clay and use an oval cutter to make the door shape. Tools and materials that I'm using in this video are listed down in the video description for your convenience. Shopping those links helps support our channel at no additional cost to you, but if for some reason the links don't work, I do hope that it's helpful in getting you started and finding the tools you're looking for. I test for size against the mushroom stem and cut a flat base for the door using a tissue blade. I like the thin but flexible blade of this tool, but you can use a razor or a craft knife. Use whatever you have to make it work. Using something sharp, I draw lines on the door. These are the planks that the door is made out of, in my imagination. I then use a wire brush to add a rough texture to the door. The wire brush can tend to pull up little crumblies of clay. I lightly brush them off the project and feed them back to the clay glob. I use a round plunger style clay cutter, linked below, to make a porthole in the door. I chose a cutter that's just a smidge smaller than the gear charm that I'm using for the window. I smush the gear into position, but not too hard, and tidy up any smush squish from the window's view. If I had a tiny mirror, I would totally put it on the inside to reflect like out the window, but maybe next time. Using a needle tool, I retouch the plank lines on the door. I've poked 2 holes and planted a rolled bit of clay into each of them to become the door's hinges. You could totally use a different color of clay here, like the Sculpey Primo effects in one of their metallic colors, or, like me, you could burnish the surface with some mica powder. These are Pearl X, I think, in like Aztec Gold or Sunset Gold or something. Painting after baking is also an option too. I'm messy, so I use rubbing alcohol to remove any powder that ends up out of place. I cut out a rectangle and use a dot of clay to make a perfectly functional doorknob. Doors are just decoys anyhow. Fairies, I don't think they need them. There's always a booby trap probably under the doormat anyways. I roll out a gray blend, similar in composition to my brown glob, into a snake and cut it into uneven segments. Smushed, these are perfect for the stonemasonry around our door. We can add texture as we please. I use a leatherworking stamp that gives the clay a pebbled looking surface. For the walkway pavers, I sand down some of the edges of scrap wood. #hoarding. These are from back when we had a glowforge before it caught on fire for the second time. Popsicle sticks or slices of a fallen branch would both work well, or you could try making your own polymer clay paving stones, baking them and gluing those onto the base. I stack 2 pieces of the lasered wood to make stair steps between the first layer and the second, and I hold it all in place with more wood glue. I baked the polymer clay fairy door in a preheated oven on the paper that I sculpted it on at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. A second batch of freeform sculpt is mixed, and while it's nice and sticky, I bind the mushroom to the base. I used a snake of the dough to adhere the door to the shroomy, making sure to not obstruct the door's window. More dough is used to fill in the gap between the door and the stem. I then use a ball stylus dipped in water to blend the seams and add a little bit of detailing. After letting the dough cure overnight, we're ready for paint. I use slightly watered down acrylic paint to add some weathering or antiquing effects to the door and stem of the mushroom. While the paint is still quite wet, I use a pad of paper towel to blot off the raised portions of the sculpture. I apply a thick layer of the same raw umber paint to the wood elements of the base. If I had been tidy in my glue application, I wouldn't have had these odd spots around the stepping stones where the glue isn't playing nice with the paint. But we don't need to be perfect to be having fun. We'll be landscaping all of this anyhow, so if you find messy details on your own work, don't sweat it. Love them for what they are, and we'll smother them in hot glue and moss later. I blot the paint off of the stepping stones in a similar fashion to how I did the door. Now is the time to assemble our hoard of cute little things. I always keep an eye on clearance or out-of-season floral picks. You could totally make your own polymer clay floral pieces, like leaves and roses and different flower shapes. But you could also use dried or paper flowers, acorns and acorn caps, bits of old vine, fun little twigs, shells, seed pods. Any of these would be amazing in the garden of our fairy house. Here I'm using primarily some beads and found items, reindeer moss, and crystals from my stash. I used glow-in-the-dark polymer clay by Cos Clay to make a base for the crystals. That way, my hope was that they would kind of glow a little bit. I used this same clay to make these mushrooms from a previous project, and I had some left over to use here. You can check out our extensive library of free tutorials to learn how to make your own mushrooms. High temperature hot glue works really well for me here. I wanted something that set quickly so I don't have to wait for a glue to dry or cure. When landscaping, I start with the largest features, in this case the crystals and mushrooms. I want to blend the boundary between home and nature. Did the house sprout out of the garden, or did the garden start sprouting from the feet of the house? I'm craving a feeling of nurtured chaos, a little wild and messy, but well cared for. The poofy puffs of moss are reindeer moss, and I love using them as a filler plant. Just a little bit of hot glue applied to the base of the sculpture, then smush the moss right on in, seems to hold it in very well for me. The hard bits of dark moss are made from craft glue and flock, like how you'd use for a diorama tree or bush. We'll be making some fresh here shortly. I'm taking a break from burning my fingers on hot glue, and I'm using lipstick red acrylic paint to add some color to these mushroom caps. I could have sanded and primed this big mushroom cap, but I didn't. This clearly ruined the entire project. I'm kidding, y'all. It's fine. Let your mistakes be charming quirks that pluck the strings of your imagination. Our scars tell our story. Let me know in the comments what you imagine might have caused the roof damage on this fairy's house. I like to think a stork dropped a baby gnome on it. When the base coat of red has fully dried, I begin applying light washes of fluorescent orange acrylic paint. I work this in many thin layers to build up a color gradient and a solid glow. I am very glad to have more landscaping to do. It keeps me busy between layers of paint drying. Using a paper cup and a popsicle stick, I mix 2 tones of diorama flocking with a clear drying glue at roughly a 1-to-1 volume ratio. So about half the cup of glue first, and then I fill it in the remainder of the way with the flocking moss, trying to give myself just a bit of headspace to be able to stir it all together. You can always feel free to add a little bit more glue or a little bit more flocking to get it to suit your preference. I use this flock to fill in the whole front yard, as well as any gaps that I don't want to use poofy moss for. So exposed bits of hot glue or in between some of the bits up by the house, perfect opportunities to use this flock moss. I have an old bottle of Mod Podge Puzzle Saver, which is just so stinky to me, but it needs used up and I wanted to see how well it works for this application. I had to sit the whole sculpture on the porch until it dried because of the smell, but the results were excellent. Tacky glue and generic white craft glue, anything that dries clear with a relatively satin or matte finish, is my preference. A ball stylus, paintbrush, or toothpick, really anything really, can be used to paint on some dots. I recommend experimenting on a scrap paper to get a feel for it before committing art on our mushroom caps. The best advice I can give is to aim for consistency and it'll end up looking great. So if every single dot is a messy splotch, so long as it's consistent, then it looks like it was on purpose and nobody's going to know that those messy splotches were supposed to be perfect little round dots. The next day, when my flocking yard is dry, I fill in some final details with hot glue and fluffy moss. A side note on that flocking moss, if you have some left over at the end of a project, I like to spread it out in a about ½ inch or more thick layer to dry, like not like a solid layer, but I just kind of spread it the way you would if you're trying to dry herbs or something on a rack. And I just let it dry, and then I can break up the larger pieces or leave them as is, and I just save it in a little Tupperware for future projects. Hashtag hoarding. A trophy case or dome-style cloche is a great way to protect our fairy houses from cats, dust, and the ravages of time. And this is how it turned out. I just love it. We gave it to my eldest niece as a home-warming gift when she moved into her first apartment. My wish is that her home is filled with the magic, laughter, and joy that she inspires in our hearts. I don't know which part is my favorite, honestly. Possibly how the caps came out. I really love the red-orange blend. That's something that I've had to work really hard to get the results that I want, and I'm really tickled with how it came out this time. Do you have any favorite details, questions to ask, or ideas to share? Come hang out with us in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. You're invited to like and subscribe, click all the buttons. If you enjoy our free tutorials and want to participate, find out more at backtoearthcreations.com. We have a calendar of events, a craft-along club, a handmade bead and art shop, and a library of over 800 free tutorials. Links to all of this are down in the video description. Okay, this is it glowing. This is the only footage I was able to get of it glowing. So this is it under a black light, but it should glow just in the dark as well, which I think would be really, really cool. But I'm just, I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, happy crafting. Mwah. Bye.